They don't see it well on their iPhone. Like, what can you see on an iPhone? But if you go to the library, use the big screen. So far, I had good response.
Okay.
Are we on? Thank you very much. So, no, it should be working just fine. I mean, has anyone tried it? Has anyone had a chance to see any of it? Did it work?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, cool. I'm glad. Thank you. So, all right, guys. So now we have our work cut out for us.
Will you?
Yes,
Sorry.
no problem.
I couldn't think. But will you explain what the max, what is
Yeah.
that, TT equals?
Pi.
Pi.
TT is pi. That's
Okay.
profit. Okay. And basically, what this lays out is the way we're going to approach analysis of supply. So, what do you remember, guys? What supply is? I mean, this is a curveball question. It's been a few weeks. What is supply?
The quantity that the firms are willing able to
Exactly. Quantity firms are willing and able to produce. Well, why are firms willing and able to produce a certain quantity? Why that quantity, not more and not less? What makes that quantity so attractive for firms to produce? The fact that it's the quantity that helps firms maximize the profit. That makes sense? And of course, profit is defined as the difference between total revenue and total cost. So to understand how firms choose the quantity that maximizes the profit, to find that quantity is only possible if you understand the properties of total revenue and total cost. This is why today we will sink our teeth into analysis of total cost. Once we're done with that, we will talk about total revenue, and of course that's going to be a discussion for the rest of the session. That makes sense? Very good. So, today we're going to start talking about total cost, and we're going to proceed in several steps. So, properties of total cost. We're going to introduce the concept of total product. We're then going to introduce the concept, let me actually write it like this so I save some real estate here. Total product. Then we will introduce the concept of variable cost. Then we will introduce the concept of fixed cost. And then total cost. And we will then understand the properties of total cost. Okay? So that's the sequence of ideas as they will develop. Now, before we actually start doing these boring things, let's ask ourselves, what do we mean by properties of total cost? What are the properties of total cost? Guys, by properties of total cost, we mean, how does total cost change when you change the production? In other words, how does cost of baking pizza change as you bake more pizza? It's almost as if I was asking, what costs more, baking few pizzas or baking a lot of pizzas? It's almost as if I asked you, what costs more, throwing a small party or throwing a big party? What costs you more?
It depends.
if you charge people what they want.
What does it depend on? Have you ever thrown a big party?
No.
Have you ever thrown, you only throw small parties. Okay, so what's more expensive? Throwing a party for 5 friends or throwing a party for 150 people? All right. Is that surprising? Are you shocked by this insight? No. In other words, producing more costs more. Does it make sense? Now, why were you hesitant, guys? I noticed many of you were hesitant. Some of you said that depends. And I'm sure you have something in mind, something that makes you pause. Like if I ask you, what costs more, baking 3 pizzas or 30 pizzas? Why do you hesitate?
Because it depends on like how much you put on the pizza or how much.
Yeah.
You
It's
betcha.
really-
But let's say all of them are identical. In other words, you can either bake 3 identical pizzas or 30 identical pizzas. What costs more? What costs
What
less?
would it cost per pizza, I guess?
Ah.
Marginal.
In other words, is it possible that when you bake 30 pizzas, each pizza on average is gonna cost less? How could that happen? Why could that happen?
Buying in bulk.
Well, for example, because in order to bake 30 pizzas, you actually go to BJ's and you bake by bulk dough, which costs you less per unit, correct? There you go. Is that a good intuition? Does that lead you to some good, useful results? Absolutely it does. Is that what I was asking you? No, I didn't ask you about average cost. I asked you about total cost. Okay? This is why it's so important to be very precise about the words we're using. So when it comes to total costs, total cost of electricity, total cost of dough, total cost of paste, total cost of everything it takes to bake 30 pizzas, you compare that to the cost of baking 3 pizzas. Which costs more?
30.
Very good. In other words, is it fair to say that as quantity of production increases, dollar cost of baking pizza goes up? Is that fair to say? Does that make sense? In other words, would you agree that total cost of production is rising in quantity? Absolutely. It's very intuitive, right? Now I'm going to ask you an ultimate curveball question. Would you say that this total cost is rising linearly, or it's convex, or it's concave, or perhaps it increases like a spaghetti? Which of these do you think is the best fit for how fast total cost tends to increase? Is there an easy intuition that can give you an answer to that? Guys, as far as intuition goes, the best we can do is say, yes, it costs more to bake 30 pizzas than 3 pizzas, so it will be increasing. But there's no way we can tell, without more information, whether it grows like this, like that, like this, whatever. Nothing more we can tell. In other words, we don't know. Yes?
I was just wondering, what is that symbol, like that Q? Is that just a new thing we introduced?
Okay, what is that Q, guys?
Is it
Quantity.
quantity, but why isn't it like written how we usually write it?
Which means, why isn't it like this?
Yeah.
Capital Q. Why are we using lowercase q? Very good question. And you will see more and more lowercase q's as we proceed. So what's going to be the difference between capital Q? Right? This was the picture you got used to. That's why this threw you off.
Yeah.
What was this a picture of?
It's a quantity.
A market in
Equilibrium.
equilibrium, right? In this, let's say this is Jacksonville Pizza Market. Jacksonville Pizza Market produces thousands of pizzas every day, right? So let's say this is several thousand pizzas is the equilibrium output of pizza every day. Is it realistic to assume that there's thousands of pizzas baked in this town every day? Probably. Guys, this is like a city of more than 1 million pizza eaters, so I'm sure we can gobble up a few thousand pizzas a day. Who bakes those thousands of pizzas? Who are those producers? Several hundred pizza places, right? Several hundred pizza places produce this many pizzas a day. In other words, this is market output of pizza, okay? Market output of pizza. Here, we're not asking about the market for pizza, we're asking about one total cost of baking pizza in one pizza place. One pizza place.
Oh, okay,
One
so
firm.
one
One
firm.
firm. One firm, guys. So when you see lowercase q, that is output of one firm, production of one firm. Does that make sense? Whereas this is production of the entire market.
Is it a
That's
lower,
going to be the distinction. Yes?
is it a lowercase p too?
Is it lowercase p or uppercase p? Does it make any difference? Why doesn't it make a difference in case of pizza? Because price is the same, right? You're selling your large one-topping pizza at $10. It's the market price, so that price is going to be the same for sake of our analysis, okay?
And the money sign
It's
stands
just
for the
dollars.
price?
It doesn't necessarily stand for price, because here we're tracking costs, not price.
Okay.
This is not a price of pizza, this is just cost in dollars, right? Now, you might ask, why don't I just write cost here? And the answer is because I'm prepping you. I'm prepping you for the time when in this graph, we're not just going to have costs, we're also going to have revenue. We're also going to have profit. We're going to have a lot of stuff in that graph. What all those variables have in common is that they're all measured in, there you go. That's why we're going to have dollars on the vertical side, on the vertical axis. That make sense? Good question, so I'm glad you're paying attention. So far we just posed a basic question. What is the basic property of total cost? Is it increasing, decreasing, flat in quantity? And we're saying it's increasing. But we don't know the pattern of increase in total cost. We don't know how fast cost is increasing. I am thinking I will reproduce that picture here just to keep track of the question we asked. Okay, total cost, dollars, quantity. And I will use this prime real estate to start an actual analysis. And our actual analysis starts with the concept of total product. In other words, we're going to start with something that has no obvious connection to our basic question, the properties of total cost. I'm going to start talking about, let's say, moving pianos. Moving pianos. Picture yourself starting a summer business. In the summer you want to make some money, you think, I don't want to work for someone else, I've been doing it every summer since I remember. This summer I'm going to be making money on my own. Housing market is getting better, a lot of people are buying houses, there's a bunch of kids around, people are going to want to buy pianos and move them. So I'm going to start me a piano moving business. Let's ask, if you hire certain number of workers, labor, you hire certain number of workers, we'll call that labor, number of workers per day. Is that going to determine just how many pianos, quantity of pianos you can move?
Yeah.
Absolutely. For example, if you hire nobody, let's say you're not moving pianos, okay, you're just organizing the business. If you hire nobody, nobody's moving pianos, how many pianos a day can you move? 0. Very good. If you hire one worker, how many pianos, grand pianos, can one worker move in a day? Have you ever tried moving a piano? But you
with
can,
someone, yeah.
you've seen a piano. Have you ever tried to actually move a piano within a room at least? Like move it by 5 inches so you can dust behind the piano or something, dust off the floor behind the piano. You know that pianos are bulky and extremely heavy, right? How many pianos a day, let's say you're hauling pianos, take a truck, bring it to an apartment building and you're hauling that piano to 2nd floor.
Zero.
Zero.
Zero, right? So let's pretend for a second, just for the sake of example, let's pretend that that first employer you hired is Arnie Schwarzenegger. Superman, okay? Who just landed from another planet. And let's say he's strong enough that he can actually move one piano. In a day. But you know that moving pianos on your own, alone, for one person, is almost undoable job. It is just horrible. Which is why you never really see a single person moving pianos. You always see a crew, right? So when you hire second worker, the second worker, is that going to increase the total product, the number of pianos you can move in a day?
Yeah.
In other words, is there a difference moving a piano on your own as opposed to moving your piano with another strong person?
Yes.
Huge difference, right? Everybody who moved furniture knows that having someone else on the other end makes all the difference, right? Now, so would you expect that two people can actually move more pianos than just one person could?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you be surprised if two people can move a lot more pianos than just one person could?
Yeah.
In other words, would it be shocking if two people can move actually three pianos? In other words, you have twice as many people, but they can move more than twice as many pianos. Is that possible? Could that happen?
Yes.
Can the productivity go up so much just by adding one more person?
Yes.
It may or may not, but it just might happen. I mean, if you're strong, you're moving furniture, you suddenly have a strong friend, the two of you can actually accomplish a lot more than you could accomplish yourself. It could happen, right? Does adding the third worker make a difference? I'm sure they're bulky and the third person can still help. Is it possible that the third person actually helps you move 6 pianos a day? Let's say, okay? Now, as you add more workers, let's say you add the fourth worker. Now remember, it's you, 4 of you around one piano. It's not like you create 2 crews who separately move pianos. It's 4 guys. Sorry, I'm talking guys. This is not a lady work. If you move piano, you don't want to do it. It's not for ladies, right? So you have 4 guys moving those pianos. Are 4 of them around that piano going to make a difference? Are 4 of them going to move more pianos in a day than 3 would? Possibly. Would you expect the increase in productivity, the increase in product, and the number of pianos they can move, again, to be as spectacular as it was with hiring the second, the third worker?
Not that much.
Certainly not that much, right? That fourth person will help. Let's say
Unless
now they're moving 8 pianos a day. Okay?
what if like 2 were moving one and then 2 were moving another?
Exactly.
and then-
That's what I said. We're assuming a weight. Let's suppose that's not
Okay.
happening. It's really one crew. Okay? One crew. How about the 5th person? Is the 5th person going to help? I don't know. Maybe the 5th person can stand somewhere around the piano, or perhaps the 5th person holds the door open, or something. Maybe the 5th person helps, but probably not a whole lot, right? So let's say the 5th person helps you to move, whatever, 9 pianos a day. Okay? How about the 6th person around that piano? Is that going to help?
Probably not.
Probably not, if at all. How about 7? How about 10? How about 15? How about 35 guys around one piano? Is hiring 36 guy going to help any? If you have 150 guys around that one piano, you hire 151st guys, that's going to happen. No, ultimately, you're bound to hire another guy that just causes everybody else to trip over themselves and injure themselves, in fact, right? In other words, eventually hiring additional labor to accomplish that task simply becomes either less beneficial or it becomes an outright hindrance. That makes sense?
Inefficient.
Well, we're getting there. We're going in that direction, absolutely. Now, look, when we connect these dots, we get a peculiar shape. It's not a line, it's a curve. But it's not a curve that is convex. It's not a curve that is concave. It's a snake kind of curve, right? It has a portion where it's growing at an increasing rate, and it has a portion where it's still growing, but it's growing at a decreasing rate, correct? Look at those numbers, guys. How much does output increase when you hire the first person? How much does output increase when you hire the first person? It hires from 0 to 1 piano a day. It increases by 1. How much does output increase when you hire the second person? It increases by 2 pianos. How much does output increase when you hire the third person? How much does output increase when you hire the third person? By 3 pianos. When you hire the fourth person, output increases by how much? By 2 pianos. And when you hire the fifth person, output increases by how much? By 1. In other words, yes, output is increasing. So yes, each worker that we depicted so far contributes to total output. But not each worker contributes to total output at the same rate, right? You see that first 3 workers contribute at an increasing rate. Contribution by the first worker is an extra piano. Contribution by the second worker is extra 2 pianos. By third worker, extra 3 pianos. But contribution of the fourth and fifth worker are getting smaller. Correct? Why is that? How come, in this particular example, contribution of the first, second, and third worker is increasing? Fourth, fifth is decreasing.
So you don't need 3 people.
Say it again?
You only need 3 people to be most of it. Like,
You only need people if you only need 3 people if you need to move 6 pianos. If you need to move 9 pianos, 3 people are not going to do, right? You're hinting at efficiency, right? Yes, we are moving in that direction, but it's still a little ways away. So we don't have to draw, sweeping conclusions quite yet. But look, this is a simple story, and it's based on a certain premise. First of all, we said, when you're moving pianos with a friend, there's 2 of you moving pianos. It makes a huge difference, right? Even adding the third worker makes a huge difference. Adding fourth and fifth workers makes less and less of a difference. That makes sense? That's basically what explains what's happening here. We simply assume this. By the way, why is it that adding more and more and more workers eventually makes less and less of a difference? What about adding more and more and more workers ends up helping less and less? Let's not go into efficiency quite yet. Let's try keep it simple. Guys, as you're adding more and more workers to the same job, it simply gets crowded, right? That's what you basically crowded. It gets too crowded around that piano. When you add 10 people, when you have 10 people, 15 people, 20 people around one piano, another worker is not going to help, not because they're weak, not because they're lazy, but because there's simply not enough room around that job. That makes sense? It's like if you have a pizza kitchen. Let's say this is a pizza place, this is the kitchen. There's one cook here. One cook can only knead that much dough, right? So if you need to produce more dough, what do? You add one more cook. Now there's two cooks next to each other kneading the dough, right? Throwing those pizzas. It's fun to look at. If you need to bake more pizzas, you add third cook. Now you have three cooks next to each other kneading the dough and rolling it and whatnot. If you need to bake more pizzas, eventually you're going to have 10 cooks here, 15 cooks here. Is adding another cook going to help much in such a small kitchen? No. Why? Because it's going to get crowded, right? So this crowding effect, overcrowding effect, is something that can happen in every workplace, at every job, if only you add enough workers. And as you keep adding more and more workers, you can be sure of one thing. Eventually you'll reach number of workers beyond which each additional worker contributes less and less. That makes sense? Simply because it's getting crowded. That's all there's to it, guys. Now, of course, because this is economics, and you study it at college, we have to use terminology. It means fancy language that makes it sound like science. Ideas we developed so far are extremely simple. We're moving pianos, right? So, to make this sound respectable, we give these little numbers, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, a name, marginal product. Marginal product. Marginal product. And we see that in this particular example, marginal product of additional worker increases up to 3 workers. But beyond 3 workers, 4th worker, 5th worker, 6th, 7th worker, marginal product would be doing what? What is happening to marginal product of the 4th worker, 5th worker? Is it increasing? It is decreasing. And we know that it must eventually be decreasing. Why does it have to be decreasing? It has to be decreasing because it's getting overcrowded, right? So this pattern of decreasing marginal product is a direct result of overcrowding when you keep adding more and more workers. So it's something that must happen. In other words, this curve must have this hump-shaped portion reflecting diminishing, well, I just gave it away, decreasing marginal product, right? Decreasing marginal product because it's getting overcrowded. But of course, to make this sound like a science, you have to use archaic English language. Words like diminishing, right? That's not enough paper. So we have diminishing marginal product. You might say, no, we don't have diminishing marginal product. Marginal product is first increasing. And you're right. But I can be sure of one thing. If you only add enough workers, marginal product will be what? Diminishing, because it's going to get overcrowded. You agree? Everybody on the same page? Very good. But if you know that something will happen with absolute certainty, in other words, if you only add enough workers, is it working?
Yeah.
Good.
It's got one more bar left.
Still up?
One more bar left.
It was all freshly charged.
Yeah, it's down to 1.
Please watch it, yeah. So, one thing we can be absolutely certain about, if only you add enough workers, it's going to get sufficiently crowded that marginal product becomes diminishing, right? But what do we call these relationships that happen and hold with absolute certainty in science? Science uses a very powerful word. Like, what happens to this marker if I release it? Is it going to float or is it going to go up? It's going to go down. You said it with absolute certainty. How do you know that for sure?
It's a law.
Oh, because it's a law. Right, exactly. So guys, with absolute certainty, we know that if you only add up enough people, it's going to get crowded. And if it gets crowded, marginal product will be diminishing. Since we know it's going to happen, we call it what? We call it what?
A law.
The law of diminishing marginal product. The law of diminishing marginal product. Okay? Sometimes economists refer to it as the law of diminishing returns. It's a historical name, archaic name, the way it was used to be taught 100 years ago. You can still hear it among economists, sometimes in the media, the law of diminishing returns. But I prefer the law of diminishing marginal product because it's more descriptive. You know exactly what it is we're talking about. We're talking about marginal product. It doesn't say that marginal product is always diminishing, decreasing. It says that eventually you'll reach the level of labor beyond which adding more workers makes marginal product diminish because it's getting overcrowded. Does that make sense? Are you impressed? Do you guys feel like your view of the world has been now completely transformed by your insight into the law of diminishing marginal product? I mean, it makes sense, you know what I'm talking about, but how's that going to help us understand profit maximizing behavior of firms? Well, let me show you how. Now I'm gonna do something that's actually not gonna make any sense. I'm gonna take this graph, horizontal axis, vertical axis, and I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna flip it like this. I'm gonna replace vertical axis by horizontal axis and horizontal axis by vertical axis. In other words, quantity was the vertical axis. Now I'm going to make it a horizontal axis. Labor was the horizontal axis. Now I'm going to make it a vertical axis. That makes sense? Now, if I switch the axes, what do you think will happen to this snake? It will also flip. Look, this snake's like this, right? It first grows at an increasing rate, then at a decreasing rate. If I flip the axis, I basically take the snake and I flip it like this, right? That's basically what's going to happen. We can, of course, do it number by number. So, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the labor axis. So we have 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's labor. And on the horizontal axis, one worker can move 1 piano. 2 workers can move 3 pianos, right? 3 workers can move 6 pianos. 4 workers, 8 pianos. 5 workers, 9 pianos. Correct? Everybody on the same page? Now, when I connect the dots, this is what I get. What does this curve look like?
Same.
Like a snake. Because it really is the same snake as this one, only it snakes the other way around, right? If this snake first grew at an increasing rate and then at a decreasing rate, this snake here grows at a decreasing rate and then at an increasing rate. Are you surprised? No, because it's the same snake, only flipped around, right? Okay. Does this strike you as something really useful? Turning and twisting snakes? Why are we doing it? Here's why we're doing it. here tells you that if you want to move certain number of pianos in a day, you have to hire certain number of workers, right? Let's suppose that each worker costs $100 a day to hire, okay? You're paying each guy $100 a day. That's the going wage. If you pay each guy $100 a day in wage,
Does that stand for wage?
W stands for wage. How much does it cost you to move one piano? To move one piano, you have to hire one guy. To hire one guy is going to cost you $100. Right? How much is it going to cost you to move 3 pianos? 200, because to move 3 pianos you have to hire 2 guys. You're going to have to pay them $200. Does it make sense? To move 6 pianos is going to cost you 300. To move 8 pianos is going to cost you 400. To move 9 pianos is going to cost you 500. Does it make sense? In other words, the cost of moving certain number of pianos, if all you use to move those pianos is a bunch of guys, the cost of moving those pianos is simply going to be wage times number of workers, correct? In other words, that's going to be your cost of moving pianos. Does it make sense? So what you see here in the graph is the cost of moving pianos. Now let me ask you, what costs more, moving 9 pianos or moving 1 piano? What costs more, moving 9 pianos or moving 1 piano? Moving 1 piano costs you $100. Moving 9 pianos costs you $500. In other words, what did we just find out? We found out that moving more pianos costs you more dollars. Is that true? Moving more pianos costs more than moving fewer pianos.
Technically, yeah. Yes.
Isn't that something we talked about already today? When I asked you, what are the properties of cost of doing something? What costs more, baking a lot of pizzas or few pizzas? Baking a lot of pizzas costs more than baking few pizzas, right? What costs more, moving a lot of pianos or few pianos? Moving a lot of pianos costs more than moving few pianos, right? But then I asked you, if we know that cost is increasing, can you tell me whether that cost is increasing linearly, whether it's concave, convex, or whether it's some kind of a spaghetti? And you could not tell me. You did not know the answer. Are we still okay? Good. You did not know. Look at this graph. Can you now tell me what the shape of cost actually is? First of all, is it increasing as we intuitively kind of felt it would? Is this an increasing curve? Absolutely. Is it linear? No. Is it concave? No. Is it convex? No. It's some kind of a snake. And it has a very particular snakeful shape. What makes that snake look exactly the way it does? The variation in marginal product. The fact that marginal product is initially increasing is responsible for this bend in the cost curve, right? And the fact that marginal product is eventually doing what? Diminishing is responsible for this bend in the cost curve, okay? Now, does every production process have to have this portion of total product where adding additional worker results in larger marginal product? This kind of synergy where two workers can accomplish so much more than just one can. Does every single production process do that?
No.
Not necessarily. Give me an example of a production process where adding one more worker is gonna make about as much difference as adding the first worker.
Like the pizza thing. Say one guy can make 3 pizzas in a day.
So you add another one, you get
Same
6, let's say,
same
exactly.
every time.
Or you have a dental office and you have a dental chair, okay? And you have one dental hygienist. How many patients can one hygienist serve in a day?
Say 5.
5, let's say. Okay, so you open the second shift, and now you have a dental hygienist working on that same chair, the second shift. How many more patients can that second hygienist serve? 5. So is there gonna be increasing marginal product if you hire the second hygienist? No, it's gonna be, see? So marginal product in this example is initially increasing. This is something that may or may not happen. Yes?
Does that mean that the cost can also be linear though?
No. Why can it not be linear? Because while this may or may not be there, this portion where marginal product is increasing, this portion where marginal product is diminishing must be there.
Okay.
How do we know that that's something that happens for sure? Because eventually it's going to get crowded. That makes sense? So no, ultimately, this curve must have this shape, and ultimately, cost curve must have that shape. That makes sense?
I was thinking of it, like, because you said like the one chair, like the 2 guys were on the one chair. I was thinking of like 2 guys on 2 chairs, like I was adding.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was thinking it would be linear. Okay, I got you.
You know, well, you're still right in the sense that first hygienist you hire will contribute 5 patients a day, right? Second hygienist you hire will contribute 5 patients on the same chair.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was adding.
Third shift, you open third shift, the night shift, the night owl shift, right? Another 5 patients. That means you're operating your dental office 24/7, right? Then you hire the 4th hygienist. Well, the 4th hygienist has to join the first hygienist for the day shift. Are they together working on one chair gonna be able to serve more patients?
No.
Maybe if one of them serves one half of the mouth, the other one the second half of the mouth or something, they get the job faster done or something like that, right? But again, is that 4th dental hygienist, gonna be able to add as many patients as the first, second, and third? No, because it's starting to get crowded around that chair. Ultimately, if you have 17 dental hygienists around one patient, it's really crowded, right? You get the idea. So this is something that must happen. The marginal product must start to diminish. That makes sense? Very good. That's why the cost curve we derived has this particular shape. This is something that may or may not happen, just like the synergy here may or may not happen. If there is this portion where marginal product keeps increasing, you have this portion of the cost curve. But eventually, marginal product must be diminishing, that's the law, and ultimately the cost curve must have this particular shape, okay? That's the law of diminishing marginal product. I can just write it in there. The law of diminishing marginal product, right? Determines this shape of the cost curve. Now my question to you is this a good approximation of what we call total cost? It could be, if really your cost of moving pianos is just those $100 for every worker you hire, then this would be your total cost. But let's try and consider a more sophisticated example. Let's say you want to bake pizza. Do you own a space to bake pizza? Do you own a building where pizza is being baked? If you want to open a pizza place and you don't own the place, how do you open a pizza place?
Lease it.
You lease it, absolutely. But if you lease it, you will have to pay monthly
Right.
rent. Is rent also a cost of baking pizza?
Big time.
Absolutely. How is your rent rising if you decide to bake more pizza? Oh, so you want to tell me that rent, which is part of your cost, is actually not rising? How is your rent going down if you choose not to bake pizza? For example, you decide to take a month vacation. So you go to see your landlord and you tell your landlord, you know what, landlord? This month I'm not baking any pizza, so I'm not going to pay you rent.
No,
Is that going to work?
it's not.
No. If you guys have an apartment, if you rent an apartment, imagine telling your landlord, oh, this month I'm going to only pay you half of the rent because I took a vacation and I saw my parents for 2 weeks. Is your landlord going to go for that? No. In other words, rent is also a cost of production. But does your rent depend on how much you produce?
No.
No. Frankly, whether you produce
Or not.
great quantity or small quantity, your rent
Will stay the
is
same.
always the same.
It's a lease.
It's a lease. That's exactly the point. So you see, some costs look like this. Other costs look like that. Right? In other words, some costs rise with quantity produced. They vary. They're variable. Okay? So some costs are variable. Other costs are not variable. What do we call them if they're not variable?
Fixed.
We call them fixed costs. Absolutely. What do you then think is total cost? If this is the variable cost of production, this is fixed cost of production, then total cost will be
The sum.
the sum of the two. Absolutely, the sum of the two. So let me replace this with total cost, which is the sum of variable cost and fixed cost. Now my question is, if you add variable cost snake and fixed cost constant, what do you get? What kind of a graph is that going to be? What's it going to look like? Guys, it's simple. Imagine this is a statue of a snake, modern art, okay? This here is a stand. What are you going to do with this piece of art? You're going to put it on top of the stand. That's what it means to add a snake on top of the stand, right? You add those two curves. So you get the same snake, except now this snake is going to be standing on top of a fixed cost. That makes sense? Big. What did we find, guys?
Total cost.
We found total cost. This is what total cost looks like in general. Okay? And the portion where your total cost is rising at an increasing rate reflects the law of diminishing marginal product. Does that make sense? Very good. Do we want to replace that battery before it dies on us, or is it still okay?
We still got 1 bar.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's roll the dice.
Let's keep pushing. So guys, what have we accomplished so far? We have used the discussion of properties of total product with this example of moving pianos. We used it to establish certain pattern of marginal product, which may or may not be increasing in the beginning. But eventually, as you add more and more workers, your marginal product must diminish, right? And from those properties of marginal product, we were able to derive the basic properties of total cost. And now we know what total cost looks like. Do you guys remember why we're interested in the properties of total cost? Because total cost in combination with total revenue is what determines your
Profit.
profit. And profit is what you are trying to maximize. Exactly, right? In other words, establishing the shape, the properties of total cost is the first step in our quest to understand how firms maximize profit. Because only if we understand how firms maximize profit can we explain the properties of supply and ultimately efficiency of the markets, right? That's what we're after. So this is the first step. Now, this part is accomplished. Let's try and quickly turn our attention to total revenue and see what happens. Let me remind you, what is total revenue? Let me leave a little bit more room here. What is total revenue, guys? If you're selling 50 pizzas at $10 a pizza, what's your total revenue?
500.
How did you find the answer?
Number of pizzas by price. Quantity in tons.
Exactly. Price of pizza times number of pizzas gives you total revenue. What do you think the properties of total revenue are? Well, whatever that means, properties of total revenue. Let's ask, how does your total revenue in dollars change as you bake more and more pizzas? For example, if you bake and sell no pizza at the going price of $10 per pizza, what's gonna be your total revenue? If you bake and sell no pizza, how much revenue do you generate? Absolutely none, zero. If you bake and sell one pizza, what's gonna be your total revenue? $10. If you bake and sell two pizzas, what's gonna be your total revenue? $20. If you bake and sell three pizzas, what's gonna be your total revenue? $30. Do we really have to go to 4 or 5 pizzas? Or is it already boring? Total revenue is extremely simple, right? When you connect those dots, what do you get? A straight line representing total revenue. That makes sense? So now we have a total revenue.
Is total revenue always linear?
Good question. Is total revenue always linear? What do you think, guys? This is not a bad place to pause and think.
Well, if the price changes, then.
Oh, in other words, if the price does not change, no matter how much you produce,
Then yeah,
then yeah, it's linear. But if price changes as you bake more or bake less, then yes, total revenue may be curved, right? But what does it tell you about the market you're operating in if the price is always the same regardless of how much you bake? It tells you that you have absolutely no
Control.
market power. Exactly. Oh, it means you're baking pizza in Jacksonville. Whether you bake 1 pizza, 10 pizzas, 100 pizzas, it's going to make absolutely no impact on price of pizza in Jacksonville. Doesn't make sense? You have no market power. On the other hand, if you're Apple Corporation, you want to sell million iPads, you can set the price really high. If you want to sell 10 million iPads, you better be more reasonable with that price, right? You better sell it for $700. If you want to sell 50 million iPads, that price is going to be $550. If you want to sell 700 million iPads, you're going to have to sell it for $300, right? In other words, that's a firm that has control over market price. In other words, that would be a firm with market power, and its total revenue will no longer be linear, it will be curved. How curved? I'm going to show you on Thursday. Today, I'm not going to show you that. Why not?
Too much.
We don't have
Because
enough
today
time.
we're talking about firms with no market power. Anyway, we're slowly running out of time, but let's see how much we can squeeze out of it. So, since we're assuming no market power, constant price, given by the market, total revenue is a linear line. That makes sense? Okay, let's now erase Arnie Schwarzenegger and look what we have. We have total cost and we have total revenue. What are we missing to find the profit? Nothing. We have it all. Is it legit to graph both total cost and total revenue in one graph? Do they live in the same system of axes? Yeah, they both have quantity on the horizontal axis and dollars on the vertical axis. So we can definitely graph them in one graph. And again, remember that's lowercase q because we're talking about 1/3, right? So we have
Battery's going out.
total revenue,
Battery's flashing.
flashing. So let's close it and